Hi, everyone. Welcome to CISA's annual meeting. Welcome to all of you, and we are going to get started. My name's Claire Morneau, and I am CISA's communications manager. And to get us actually started and to welcome us properly, I would like to introduce Phil Korman, CISA's executive director, and Al Griggs, the chair of CISA's board. Al, do you want to get us going?
Sure, Claire, thanks so much. Claire told me that there are 80 people who registered for this webinar this evening, CISA's annual meeting. You know, you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about CISA, and we appreciate that enormously. Thank you for being with us this evening. What I want to do also as chair of the board and on behalf of the board, I want to take this moment to thank the staff of CISA who have worked through, I just learned, 405 days of torment. They've done a wonderful job, and as you'll hear this evening, the results of 2020 are just terrific. But it's only because these women and men were able to work through the difficulties that COVID imposed upon them. So I do want to thank them. They've just been a wonderful, wonderful asset to all of us. So, and with that, I'll turn to Phil, and I know he wants to welcome you also.
Thank you so much, Al, and so glad everyone's with us. You know, we stand on the traditional ancestral land of the Mycoterra peoples, land that was not freely given, but rather taken through war and genocide, land that indigenous people have been living and working on from time immemorial. I want to acknowledge our neighboring indigenous nations, Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohican and Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. This pandemic just keeps revealing more and more about who we are, how we got here, and how we treat others. And I hope that these truths will serve us in the long term, not to bring us emotionally down, but rather to help us be more firmly grounded down to the land and to each other. I hate that this is our second remote annual meeting. I wish that we could be gathered in one place in person, engaged together in collective conversation and action to heal this world. And it is what it is, and I do appreciate what we do have. A gathering of all of us, farmers, legislators, supporters, and neighbors. I want to also emphasize the importance of partnership this past year. We reached out in new ways, connecting on vital issues of testing, emergency farm loans, new farmers markets, and vaccines for everyone who works on farms. Our actions this past year have continued to be guided by the belief that our farms are vital to our communities, our culture, and our survival. CISA's values of the local food economy also want to ensure that every person who works on a farm is an essential worker and must never become invisible again, with rights to a safe workplace, testing, sick leave, and access to a vaccination. And also that local food must be available to every member of the community. We are going to share our annual report tonight with a link in the chat. And please, if you don't have a chance to have your questions answered tonight, our contact information will also be in the chat. Now I turn it back over to Claire.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you, Al. So we are going to move on to our panel discussion. And before we do, I just have a few quick notes that I'd like to share with everybody. We may have time for questions at the end. We might not. We have a lot to cover. But feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go. And if we have time, we'll do our best to get to them. And as Phil said, Jacob is going to put the link to our staff contact list in the chat right now. So please do follow up with us after the meeting if you have questions that we don't get to, or thoughts that you want to share, or if you just want to be connected to resources. We really want to hear from you. And the final thing is we're going to close the meeting with a vote on CISA's new board members. So please, if you're able, stick around to help us complete that piece of business. It's necessary for us. So we appreciate your time, and Jacob will also put a link to the slate and their bios in the chat now as well. So now we're going to move on to our panel discussion. I think Phil set it up really nicely. At CISA, we have been thinking and talking a lot about what we've learned from the pandemic and the crisis that we've all been through over the past year. We've been talking and reflecting on the ways that local farmers and advocates and legislators have really stepped up to meet the challenges of the past year, and where we want to be as a community as we look forward to 2021. So that's sort of the theme of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we have a really great panel of people who will be sharing different perspectives on a lot of those complicated issues. So we're joined by Margaret Christie, CISA's Special Projects Director, and Phil Korman, our Executive Director, is going to be here. They're going to be sharing a bit of CISA's perspective on these questions. And we're very honored also to be joined by two additional panelists. Jo Comerford is the Massachusetts State Senator representing the Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester district. So she represents 24 cities and towns, which contain hundreds of farms, and she's provided a lot of really visionary leadership on farms and food systems issues. And Julia Coffey is joining us too. She is the founder of Mycoterra Farm and president of Mass Food Delivery. So she has both an individual farmer perspective and is a driving force behind one of the home delivery businesses that developed in quick response to the pandemic. So excited to hear from everybody. And we're going to get started with Margaret, I think. Margaret, could you start us off by sharing a bit of your perspective on how local farms and other businesses have been affected by and have responded to the pandemic? Maybe a little bit about how CISA's responded and where you're seeing new challenges and opportunities on the horizon.
Sure. Thanks, Claire. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be here with you, even if it's not quite the same as it could be. I feel like in the last couple of weeks or the last month, we've done, all of us have been doing quite a lot of sort of remember last year at this time and this moment and that moment. And when we think back about it at CISA, we really think about the dramatic changes that happened to markets that farmers rely on with the closing of restaurants and schools and colleges and farmers markets all at once. And then looking forward a little bit longer into the season, things like the cancellation of all weddings and the loss of, flower markets because of that, and obviously other events. So at this moment, a year ago, it was really impossible to know what things were going to look like as the season progressed. But farmers, including some of the ones here on our panel, were already making these dramatic changes in order to adapt and to figure out how to get food to people in this really new world that we didn't really know, what it looked like. And it was the time of year when farmers had to make really big decisions about what they were going to plant and how much of it, and hiring and that kind of stuff. And there was no way to forecast what things were going to look like. And so farmers just kind of kept the faith and moved forward with these big changes, and also just putting seeds in the ground and making sure that they would have food to get to people one way or another. And I would say by early May, we began to see signs that consumer demand was changing, but that it was generally very high. Farms, were telling us that they had sold out of bedding plants, even before Mother's Day, which is kind of a big bedding plant moment. People sold out of CISA shares, and that demand in most cases, stayed high throughout the season. So that was very gratifying. We recently heard from a UMass grad student, Kristen Whitmore, who did a bunch of interviews with farms, with consumers about their shopping habits in this past year. And one of the things that struck her was the amount that people talked about how their local food purchases brought them joy, and these little joyful moments in the pandemic, and how important that was to them. So at the moment, we are hearing, I would say, a mixed bag. We're definitely hearing from some farmers that demand really looks like it's staying high. And we've had some other farms saying, looks a little bit more like pre-pandemic. I also want to note what a really tough year it's been for restaurants. I know that's not a new story, you know, probably for all of you. We are really working on ways that we can amplify restaurants in our promotion. We're reaching out to them and saying, you know, are there ways that we can help? Because they are really important in the local food economy. And, you know, we're all really hoping that they're going to see, you know, some real changes as the weather gets warmer and we get more vaccinations. I want to recognize that we saw some really creative and quite rapid support for farms and food access from state government, and you know, express our gratitude for that. The state started a new grant program, the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program, which generated an infusion of funds to support farms and food system infrastructure and food access. We were able to help people apply, which was useful because those grants, the applications were all due in the summer, which was good because, you know, people needed those funds, but it also was a time when farmers were really busy. Couple of other things that CISA did during this pandemic year. As you all know, there was a lot of guidance that came out from the state and federal level about worker safety and food safety and protocols and what you had to do to try to keep everybody safe. And we were able to really help farms and farmers markets figure out, how do you implement those things in the real world? Because it's one thing to read what the CDC says, but it's another thing to figure out, how do you do that on a farm? We also were really gratified to be able to help farms think through some of the big changes they were making, like adding online ordering or aggregating product from other farms and businesses, doing delivery. You know, farmers did the heavy lifting on figuring that stuff out. And when we were able to provide support around the edges, you know, we were really glad because we were so grateful for the efforts they were making. We tried very hard and succeeded, I think, in keeping our website really up to date with information about where you could get local food, which was, you know, changed rapidly in the early part of the pandemic and was something that consumers were really looking for. So it was great to be able to be a kind of one-stop shop for that sort of thing. And some of the changes that we made, we are continuing. We've got a sliding scale for our Local Hero membership program this year because we just wanted to make sure that no matter how someone's business had been impacted, they could participate in the Local Hero program and be part of our promotion and our other services. So that's, you know, that's just sort of an overview of some of the things that we've done on our end in the last year. And that's it for me, Claire, right now.
Thanks, Margaret. Julia, I'm wondering if you could share a bit of your story as a farmer and a business owner, the more specific tale of how some of these issues have affected you over the last year, and maybe a couple of the top considerations on your mind as we head into 2021. Did we lose you, Julia?
I think you're muted, Julia.
It's muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you are.
So last year was our 10th year in operation for Mycoterra Farm, which I established in the closet in my basement, and over 10 years had grown to the largest mushroom farm in Massachusetts, which is still very small to the industry and small relative to the scale of a lot of the other farms in our agricultural community. And so it was a big year. It's the year I was supposed to like have a work-life balance and like weekends and 40 hours a week. 2020 had other things in mind. And so as I grew the farm from scratch, diversification in marketing for our very specific crops was gave us a lot of stability. However, at the beginning of March, as when everything shut down on March 8th, we were looking at losing our university accounts, college campuses, farmers markets, and all of the restaurants were closing. That amounted to about 80% of our income stream. I'd been looking at the pandemic progress beforehand, and so I was frankly surprised at everything shut down in Massachusetts so late. So when we got notice that the Northampton Farmers Market was closing on March 8th, I sent out a quick email to the other vendors, wondering if anybody else was interested in establishing, networking with us to offer home delivery to our farmers market customers. We built a website in a matter of a couple days, and CISA was a resource had to go right to get some feedback, and I sent Devon a email with a link to the website we'd created to see if I could get some feedback to make it stronger. And Devon's amazing enthusiasm shared that on Facebook, and we went viral overnight, and our site crashed in a matter of a couple hours. We had 1 million hits within the first weekend. That was the beginning of mass food delivery. Over that weekend, we took 89 orders, and where we cooperated, I can't remember all of our original vendors, but Red Fire Farm, Grace Hill Farm, Red Barn Honey, and the 89 was a huge, it felt really big for us to be able to deliver those 89 orders on the 17th and 18th of March last year, because that was food for 89 households. But next week, the orders kept rolling in, and we had 512 orders in that first week. We were not in the business of aggregation or home delivery. Also because we established a lot of our market relationships at farmers markets across the state. We established a very wide net, delivering to households throughout most of Massachusetts, except for the Cape and Islands and parts of Plymouth and Bristol County. So if I'd thought about it for an instant, it probably wouldn't have happened. But when the house is on fire, you don't think about how it caught fire or a game plan for what to do. You get out and you put out the fire. And it was really a knee-jerk reaction to not only for our farm's viability. As we grow indoors year-round, we're susceptible to a lot of we're not susceptible to the seasonal pressures that other farms are. But after 20 years in agriculture, I was painfully aware that the interruptions to the income stream for farms across Massachusetts at that time of year could be crippling for our food system. So continuing to get financial resources to farms and producers in Massachusetts at that time was a tremendous urgency, especially as we saw global supply chains impacts very quickly in the pandemic. So that was the urgency behind it, and the beginning of the mass food delivery adventure that we rode through the year. Claire?
Yeah, that's quite an adventure.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us that more specific version of this story and what that felt like a little bit. Joe, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of the legislators' view on this in terms of 2020 support to Massachusetts businesses and any upcoming legislation or work that you think people should know about.
Sure. Thank you so much, Claire. It's really good to be with you all. We were talking right before the program started. It is always, my wife Ann and I have always loved supporting CISA, and now getting to be a state senator with a great Western Mass delegation. Supporting CISA is just that much more moving, more uplifting for me. So thank you to CISA staff and the board and the farmers and volunteers and all the supporters. I couldn't be more grateful to be with you. So, you know, the one thing about the legislature that I think has remained true over the last years is that there is a strong and abiding commitment to food security. The legislature has understood the intersection of farms and food. We have a food systems caucus in the legislature. We have a food policy council, which was called into being from legislation. During the crisis, the governor set up a food security task force. I was part of that task force. The Senate president asked me to join. So there was a quick response to understand in the body, in the Senate and the House. And again, I shared this work with great House members like Representative Natalie Blais and others in the Western delegation, also very supportive of CISA. There was a quick recognition that farmers, markets, the supply chains that farmers depended on, the markets that they would traditionally sell to, the consumer base, everything had shifted. And quickly, we made the connection in the legislature that food was public health, food was economic development, food was a source of a way, in fact, the frontline way to survive this global pandemic that was, you know, coming at us like a tidal wave, actually. So we moved as quickly as a legislature does. We did a lot of work on budgets quickly. For example, there is a program called the Healthy Incentives Program in the budget that went up to 13 million. That was a record high for that program. That allows a food stamp, a SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program dollar, to be used and then supplemented with fresh produce. We also put $30 million into the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program, or MEFAP. Some of that goes right to farmers. That's a legislative mandate. As Margaret said rightly, one of the things that we did on the subcommittee that I was part of in the Food Security Task Force is we set up this thing called the Food Security Infrastructure Grant. And that immediately was, one of those like light bulb going off moments. It was a grant program whose time had come. 42% of the 36 million went to farmers. So that's it's about $15 million immediately to farmers, and then more to schools and more to food suppliers, food producers that of course have a relationship with farmers. So once again, we see the legislature in that decision and the governor in that decision, understanding that when we support farmers, we support a whole range of people connected to farmers. And so, this year we're going in with that same intention. The House budget is just out today, so it's rather momentous. 13 million again for HIP, 30 million again for MEFAP. That's above the governor's base budget. So you see again this commitment. We're also going for another round of the food security infrastructure grants. It's a little bit of a moonshot at 30 million, which is what we're asking for, but it's a program that has shown that it's useful to farmers, really pragmatically useful. We can make it a whole lot better. And you can believe that Phil and others have sent me a list of ways that it must become much better in terms of it being immediately useful to farmers, but we're going for it. And then in addition to money, there's good legislation really good legislation that, again, I think builds on the lessons that we learned from COVID-19 about the need for farmers to have more ability to make money where they need it, as they want to make it. So Rep. Blay and I have a bill in, it's quite a large bill, that looks at a number of different ways, a sort of a toolkit, a menu for farmers to be able to increase their margins, even just a little bit. From things that we've tried for a lot of years, right? I probably if I could see folks on the Zoom, you'd remember about allowing for non-contiguous farmland to be taxed as farmland, even if it's little parcels. That's a small thing the legislature can and should do. But Rep. Blay and I are going farther. There's going to be an assistance program. There's more money for a next generation farmer program to help farmers transition their farms in responsible ways, the ways that they want to themselves and their families. And there's lots of other bills in, a food donation program, so that farmers that are doing what they're doing anyway help receive an immediate tax benefit as a result of that work. So I think together as a legislature, we can and should put together a meaningful package of legislation that shows that not only in money do we value farmers, and we do, but we actually can make farming and farmers' lives easier through good legislation. So I'll turn it back now.
Thank you, Jo. Yeah, lots happening, and it's great to hear about it. And thank you for all of your support. It's really amazing. I want to turn to talking a bit about farm workers and how farm workers as a group have been affected by COVID and the pandemic. So farm workers and other food system workers have taken on a lot of the risks associated with the pandemic. And Phil, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what we've been hearing about how COVID has affected people working on farms and advocacy around farm worker needs.
Sure. So, it was clear from the onset of the pandemic that our basic need for food was feeling threatened, and the governor responded by including farms, farmers markets, and others in the state food economy, and defining those folks as essential workers. And when you think about it, like, how could it be otherwise? What could be more essential than the people who are skillfully planting, cultivating, harvesting, processing, preparing, and delivering our food? So during this pandemic, those who have taken the risks, and the rest of us, if we could avoid it, we avoided the risks, but they've had to work in close quarters, interact with strangers, driving crowded vehicles to and from work and during work, and much, much more. And these people have come through because, they really had no other choice. They needed the work and they needed to feed their families. And the work has really been stressful and at times high risk. We know from early data that farm workers in California suffered an incidence of COVID 3 times higher than the normal population. And we know that in our region, there have been outbreaks on farms, as there have been in other workplaces, including restaurants. The people who work on farms also include migrants and immigrants who may lack some of the documentation they need for residency. And these same immigrants, are our neighbors and also lack access to healthcare, education, basic rights such as applying for a driver's license. And many of these people are people of color. We sang their praises when our family's food supply was endangered, but the Commonwealth was not ensuring that they could get tested until CISA and other advocates, with the help of our legislators, led by Senator Comerford and Representative Blay, turned that around. And I'm sad to say that the same story is happening around vaccines. A month ago, there was only one clinic in the Commonwealth that had a day focused on farm workers, and that's true today also. And yet we know, all of us who have tried to get vaccines, you have a much better chance if you have resources, time, and you're not suffering barriers because of culture or language. So, what does this mean for CISA moving forward? We want to highlight the debt our state and community owes to those who ensured there was food for us in our time of need and took the risks during the pandemic. So in partnership with others, we're working to change government policies and laws to improve both the viability of farm businesses and to address equity and honor those who work on farms who have not yet received the respect they are due. We want to continue to advocate for vaccine prioritization. Can't we dedicate more clinic days to farm workers? Can't we make sure that more community clinics are dispensing vaccines? And what about the novel idea of a mobile unit that can travel to farms? We do it with flu vaccines. We want to support new state bills, and Senator Comerford has listed many. And we want to push proposed legislation to the finish line. The Work and Family Mobility Act has been in play for more than a decade, and it would allow any resident in Massachusetts who has proper documentation from their country of origin to apply for a driver's license. It's not a novel idea. We have 16 states, including Connecticut, Vermont, New York, that has this law in effect already. So the question is, will we pass this legislation, or are we going to continue to put immigrants at a higher risk for COVID because of the challenges of transportation to rural farm workplaces and to meet their everyday needs and responsibilities as parents and caretakers? So here at CISA, we're going to continue to educate our community about both the need to ensure working conditions on farms are fair and just for workers and owners, and to keep our small local farms farming. Back to you, Clara.
Thanks, Phil. Joe, Phil mentioned a couple of legislative priorities that are relevant to farm workers, and I'm wondering if you have perspectives that you'd like to share on any of those or anything else that's pending that you think people should know about.
Sure. So thanks for that, Claire. Thanks, Phil, for your really important way that CISA is leading the conversation around essential workers. And, I think if Natalie were here, she'd say the same thing. It was an honor to do the work with you on testing. We couldn't have done it without CISA, without farmers and CISA as advocates behind us, holding us accountable, holding the state accountable to do what's right. Right, that's part of the democratic equation. So you help elevate the issues, and that's why we can work. You're absolutely right with regard to how hard it was to get testing. And let's just talk right now about vaccines. You're absolutely right that the state can and should do more to bring more vaccines local, to break down barriers to access for people to get vaccines who don't have ready access to a computer, as you say, who don't have an opportunity to drive to one of those mass testing sites, as you say. So this is just me now asking everybody who's viewing if you care about this, really, it is time to raise our voices together. The big onslaught of vaccines will be open on April 19th. Now, we don't have enough vaccines to immediately vaccinate the public, but on April 19th, those folks who are 55 and younger will be eligible. And we can and should bring a larger percentage of that vaccine to the people who need it. There's been some good work on home delivery. There's been some good work in equity communities, which is very, very important. I think I would venture to say we all agree, but there are members of the essential workforce who are still left out, and farm workers are among them. And the last thing I'll say super quickly is that the Family Work and Mobility Act was a must-pass piece of legislation last session. And last session, it was a public safety, immigrant rights, economic development bill. This year, it's a public health bill as well, right? Because we have to be able to, one, get the essential workforce or members of the essential workforce to work. And two, we have to stop the spread of this virus. And the only way we're going to do that is if people have options that work for them. And this is just, it was a common sense must do bill, and we have to pass it. And the way the legislature works, like probably any government body, is that people make the legislature work best. So the big bills that have passed, the climate bill, the education bill, that's because people wanted them. That's because we heard, leadership heard. The same thing has to happen for family work and mobility. So if you care about this bill, join CISA, who's been leading the advocacy in our region. And let's pass that bill this session quickly.
So glad, Joe, you were bringing up like the range of advocates we've had on these different issues. Like we were working with the Franklin Regional Council of Governments,
right,
and the Franklin Chamber around personal protective equipment, around testing. We were involved with the Pioneer Valley Workers Center and the rural community health centers across the state. And so that's been a part that's just been, I don't want to say exciting, but so important that people have been so willing to get out of their box and say what needs to get done and doing it with others. And that has to continue because we need to change the way things work right now.
I completely agree with you. It's one of the things I think we do best in Hampshire and Franklin County. There are not as many of us, and so we join together and are collaborative together and bring our strengths together to solve a problem when sometimes Boston isn't hearing us. There's just a long road to go to walk, Phil, as you know, till we're really through this pandemic and we can bring workers, essential workers, the kind of justice they need and deserve.
Yes, it seems like partnerships and like meaningful community efforts have been a really important support structure throughout this entire year and will continue to be, definitely. Julia, I'm wondering if, as someone who's working on the ground, if you have anything that you want to add to this section before we move on.
Well, hearing Joe talk about getting vaccines to people really brought back the memories of getting PPE last year. We are, prior to the pandemic, we used a lot of the PPE that is employed on the mushroom farm. So masks, gloves, isopropyl, all of those things, typical Mycoterra items, and those I could see were going to be in short supply. And I think we called you, Joe, maybe a couple times. I know we called CISA a few times, and there was one night I spent an hour on the phone with the rep at our glove manufacturing company, and he was adamant that it was, only for that they were limiting orders just to healthcare workers. And then after an hour, something like lit up, and he was like, "Wait, you deliver food to people? Like that? This is important too." And he was like, it put me on hold, and I got back on, and then he got back on the phone after about 15 minutes. He was like, "I can send you 2 cases." And he was like, "This is important work. You're bringing food to people." And those 2 cases got me through to the first Franklin Regional Council of Government order that I received. And so there was a lot of little networking. People, I got 5-gallon totes of isopropyl, and I was dosing out little portions to other farms and making hand sanitizer for my crew. There was a lot of resourcefulness, thinking about governors like taking secret routes to get PPE to people in the state, and the work that we saw in Western Mass getting it to the agricultural workers. Really, it feels like we're going through those motions again with the vaccine, what you described, and the process of really getting it to those essential places where food is food connects everybody, and the workers that touch the food are very important critical points in controlling the virus and maintaining our access to food. So yeah, thanks. It was kind of visceral hearing you share that, Joe. So it was an adventure. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. One of the themes that we keep coming back to in our conversations at CISA is the ways that the pandemic has brought a lot of its own unique challenges, some of which we just heard a little bit more about. And at the same time, the ways that it's revealed and intensified existing flaws in our society and in our food system. And one example of the latter is hunger, and how many more people around the country and in our state faced hunger this year. Margaret, could you talk a little bit about what we've seen at CISA and the work that's happened to respond to this problem?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is, Claire, as you said, it's a really good example of the ways that, kind of the underbelly of how our system work has been exposed, and we're more aware of, very significant problems that have been there for a long time, and hunger is a great example of that. It also, I think, the response to the changes in the food system, the changes in people's access to food, really highlights something else we've talked about here tonight, which is the ways that people have worked together to try to address that. So you all know a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic, and a lot of kids who had been accustomed to getting food at school as a very important source of their, daily food and nutrition, often getting both breakfast and lunch at school, we're not going to school anymore. At some point, Feeding America estimated that COVID was going to result in a 59% increase in hunger in Massachusetts. And I just think it's an enormous credit to a whole lot of organizations in our region, organizations and individuals who really stepped up to figure out how to respond to this, and built very creative collaborations to make sure that kids and families got fed. So schools who were accustomed, to feeding lots and lots of children who showed up in the cafeteria every day, suddenly had to figure out, how do you feed these children when they don't come to school at all? And a lot of schools in our region, did a lot of different things to figure out, how do you package this food so that it can get home? How do you give kids food when they come to pick up their food? You need to give them food for several days so that they're not having to come, pick it up for every meal, which nobody could possibly do. So lots of school systems were sending kids home, with food, so that they had food for 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, plus snacks. Like, just a tremendous effort, and very creative partnerships. Grow Food Northampton worked very closely with the schools in Northampton and with the Survival Center there. The Springfield Food Policy Council worked closely with the Springfield schools, who were also coordinating with other distributions, so that when families came to get food for kids, they could also pick up food for the adults in the family, who of course also need to eat. And some organizations who were not in the emergency food business prior to the pandemic, have become really important emergency food providers. The Pioneer Valley Worker Center is one example. And, I could go on, and I'm sure people all across the country have, very similar examples of the ways that people stepped up. I want to highlight the important role of farmers in those efforts, both because farmers have always donated a lot of food and continue to donate a lot of food, and also because a lot of people, both in government and in the, among these organizations that were figuring out how to get food to people, also really wanted to support farms. And so they were buying food from local farms. And as Joe mentioned, the MEFAP program, the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program, a portion of those funds, which fund purchases from food banks, a portion of those funds are designated to buy food from local farms, and the state, increased those dollars this year. So that was really important. Joe also mentioned the Healthy Incentives Program, which I'm sure many of you know provides a rebate to SNAP participants who buy local fruits and vegetables directly from Massachusetts farmers. And that program had a cap on the number of vendors of farmers who could participate, but the state opened it up to new farms this year. So that was really important. And the other thing that's, I think, important to mention about the healthy, well, there's a couple important things to say about the Healthy Incentives Program. One thing is Joe mentioned that the House budget has that program funded at $13 million. And this is something you all can take action on. You can call the governor and tell him that you really support that number that's in the House budget, which is considerably higher than the number that's in his budget. And also, commend our local legislators for their support for this program, and call your friends and family across Massachusetts and get them to reach out to their legislators and tell them how important this program is. Let's see, I guess the other thing to say about the HIP program is that it's a gem in Massachusetts. It's also fairly complicated, both on the farmer side and on the consumer side. And so that's a role that we've been able to play at CISA, is both to help farmers navigate the technology and the equipment that they need and the process, and to get the word out to consumers and advocates for SNAP recipients about how you access the program, because you do have to buy directly from farmers. And of course, where farmers sell changes based on the season. And so figuring out where you can use your HIP benefits can be a little bit complicated. So that's been, a role that we've been really delighted to be able to play.
Thank you, Margaret. Joe, Margaret touched on a couple of policies and programs, and you mentioned a few earlier also. Do you want to pull back a little bit and share a little more about what else is happening on the state level to address hunger?
Sure, happy to. And actually, I forgot something when we were talking about essential workers that I'll just wedge in now, which is something that Phil and I have talked about, and it's in the House and the Senate priorities and has been passed. We just have to get it across the signing threshold, which is paid sick time. Not all workers have access to paid sick time, and so there is legislation pending that would give 5 days of paid sick time, prorated at about $850. So an average weekly salary, and this would be afforded to anyone who is ill from COVID, ill from a vaccine reaction, needs to get a vaccine, needs to care for someone who is ill with COVID, needs to do either an elder or a child. So this is another way I think that we can honor and protect essential workers from the impacts of the COVID pandemic. And I think this is one way, one step during this pandemic, and we can see the need for sick time for essential workers like farm workers going forward. So we haven't gotten it through yet, but we will. And then I think we need to double down after this going forward. In terms of hunger, I really loved what Margaret was saying about HIP and the number of vendors the cap being raised as a result of having more money to give out. That's always been the hope of the legislature, and I love that CISA was part of that. There was also a really concerted effort on two different levels, and I know that CISA has supported this. One, getting more farmers of color into the HIP program, and two, making sure that HIP recipients increased with regard to diversity. Both of those are exceedingly important. We are lucky out here in Western Massachusetts. Our farmers were disproportionately early adopters, and our people have benefited as a result, right? The folks who access the SNAP benefit have benefited disproportionately. And so I'm glad to see more farmers in other parts of the Commonwealth have access, and more recipients, SNAP recipients in other parts of the Commonwealth and in our region get access. And, one of the things that we have to do is make HIP a program, a statutory program. Right now it's funding driven. So there's a piece of legislation to do that the whole delegation supports. And the Food Systems Caucus is in active conversation with the Department of Transitional Assistance to really talk about sustainability. What would it look like in our Commonwealth if farmers could count on, could bank on a program like HIP to bring in a portion of their income while increasing food security and really fighting hunger. So that's exciting. And then in the legislature this session, there are a number of very important anti-hunger bills. And I'll just talk, I won't talk at length about all of them, although I'd love to at some point, but there is one that's very, very poignant, and it's really ending hunger on college campuses. And that comes out of a concerted study on the part of lots of legislators and many from our region that looks at the kind of silent issue at community college, at state university, at private colleges, of students who are doing everything they can to remain in school, but needing to work, needing to put food on their own table, and not having enough money to do it. And so food insecurity and hunger on college campuses is a pretty significant issue. I will say that we've seen it spike considerably during COVID. You may remember, for example, when UMass was shut down and quarantined, there were students on the UMass campus that depended on their off-campus job to actually make the income that they needed to make so that they could feed themselves. And that's how close a margin that many students live on all year long, just what these students were experiencing. If I miss a shift, if I miss a week of work, if I'm ill, then I am at risk for food insecurity or hunger. So there is that program that is going forward. And in terms of legislation, there's also a mandatory school lunch program that is taking sort of a cue from Breakfast After the Bell. Breakfast After the Bell was a much beloved program that now, has instituted after a lot of fight, and CISA was part of that, breakfasts for kids in schools who qualify. But now, in fact, we're looking at mandatory lunch as one of the ways in which we can, again, recognize that a kid can't learn if they're hungry in the morning, at lunch, and on college campuses. So I'll stop there, but I'm glad to see so many rich and exciting bills.
Yes, thank you. Julia, I know that food access was really important to you at Mass Food Delivery from the very beginning. Very briefly, do you have anything that you'd like to share about what that has been like for you in that business?
I'm unmuted now. Well beyond mass food delivery, food access and hunger is really a driving force for my 20 years in agriculture at this point. And we, Mycoterra Farm had signed up with the HIP program back when it was launched in 2017. And it was, so we've been through several years of vending in the HIP program and the ups and downs of having the program on and then suddenly turned off. But altogether, the Healthy Incentives Program is one of the most sustainable incentive programs, if you look at it from the bigger picture, in giving people that incentive to purchase fruits and vegetables. It actually encourages people to buy and eat more fruits and vegetables. That has long range impacts for public health, nutrition, and just quantity of food in people's bellies. So, and not only, and outside of the public health realm, it is putting that money directly into Massachusetts farmers' pockets. And those Massachusetts farmers, or at least this one, spends our dollars locally. And that money continues to reverberate throughout the economy. So the HIP program is just amazingly designed for public health and to support our local farm economies. So big supporter of that. Prior to the pandemic, we had been working with senior centers and adult daycare centers, setting up mobile markets around the state, providing the seniors opportunity to shop for produce at their centers. These are people with language barriers, access barriers, and of course the financial barriers. It was devastating for us when those centers closed during the pandemic. And so in launching mass food delivery, SNAP and HIP, we accepted SNAP and HIP. However, operating that during a pandemic in a home delivery model had logistics. We had problems communicating with non-English speakers. We had some people were too vulnerable to answer the door during quarantine. It's a risk just to be able to process the transaction in person. So over the course of, from the beginning of the pandemic through 2020, we delivered over 15,000 SNAP orders to homes across the state. That's about 4,500 customers that registered, some infrequent and some regular. And we ended up writing off about $10,000 of food that we weren't able to collect payment for due to barriers. But for us, it was just so important to get the food out there and get the food to the people. It was deliver the food, worry about the money later. So that was major urgency. But now looking at the systems, it's not necessarily sustainable to run a business just dropping food on people's doors without the support. So now we're signed up for the SNAP HIP CSA to help the people that have concerns processing payment in person. So that's allowing us to reach more people. In addition to the write-offs, we getting into aggregation and food delivery, with the amount of food waste in the industry really struck me. Mycoterra farm has been selling out for years, so we have very minimal waste on our farm. But seeing the magnitude of food waste made driving donations of food that came through mass food delivery to the food bank, the survival center, Not Bread Alone, Manna Kitchen, trying to get food to organizations that were getting it in people's bellies as quickly as possible. So we created some good network there. And in addition to the SNAP and HIP program, we also were a vendor and awarded a contract for the Farmers to Family Food Box program. And that was the rollout of the program was quick, and our experience in it was a whirlwind, but over the course of it, we delivered, it was 9,600 boxes to the food bank mobile market locations. And that was another way we kind of played in getting food to people. So yeah, and it was continuing the access, streamlining the access is really important. And at this point, we're working towards being able to get approved by the USDA to accept SNAP and HIP online. Currently, it's mostly the major retailers, Amazon, I don't want to say the names, the major retailers are able to accept SNAP and HIP online, and all of that money is getting sent, or not HIP, but SNAP online. All of that money is going out of state. And if, as a state, a community of farmers and eaters, having that money, having those options for farmers and home delivery and local businesses to accept SNAP and HIP online will help keep that money circulating in the state and make us collectively stronger.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. So much going on there on the ground. So it's really great to hear about that. We are, believe it or not, coming to the end of our time together, which has gone by so quickly. Before we move to the board vote, which is going to be very efficient and fast, I want to just give people on our panel a chance, if there's anything that's come up that you want to make sure to highlight, or anything that we didn't cover. I just wanted to say in the chat, Joe is answering a question from Anita about whether the paid sick time for essential workers would be a state benefit or a requirement for employers to say. So this is just some clarification about that employers would be reimbursed. Phil, did you want to add something about the Emergency Farm Fund before we move on?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the Emergency Farm Fund is something we started when Hurricane Irene struck, and we started up in 2012. And with the pandemic, we decided we're not just going to reserve it for weather disasters. We turned to the community, we raised $100,000, and the Franklin County CDC, unsolicited, connected with us and brought a lot of resources so that we had a huge pool of money. And in 4 weeks' time, we managed to ensure that 17 farms got no interest loans totaling over $270,000. So it made a difference for those 17 farms, and it just deepened an already very good relationship we've had with the Franklin County CDC.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a really important work that happened over the past year. Joe, before we move on, when you and I chatted before the meeting, we talked about just the huge range of legislation that has passed or is in process. We didn't even have a chance to touch on in this meeting. And you had said something about the healthy soils work that you had participated in. So I wanted to give you a chance to just mention anything that we didn't cover so far.
Sure, and actually to what Julia said earlier about food waste, it's completely real. And there is a bill in the legislature, it's S294, and it's actually would give farmers up to a $2,000 tax credit for food donations, right? So, and to nonprofit entities fighting hunger. It's one of the two, what I referred to earlier is the tools in the toolboxes for farmers to take and use to put together more financial viability. That's what the legislature, I believe, owes farmers. Farmers have led the way on climate change, and that's what the Healthy Soils legislation that passed last session in the Economic Development Bond Bill really represented. NOFAMAS, CISA, and other entities, have said for a long time, look, we know that our climate goals, our nation's climate goals, our Commonwealth's climate goals, they can't be met with just really, laying in heavy on wind and solar, really changing our transportation, changing our built environment. We need to sequester carbon, and we need to sequester more of it, and we need to grow our ability to do that. And so, again, with farmers at my back, I filed a piece of legislation called the Healthy Soils legislation, and this would actually recognize, it's now law. I have to remember, it passed. It would say to farmers that are doing low and no-till farming, which again, many Western Mass farmers are doing anyway because it's healthier soil. It leads to healthier and more abundant yields, and it keeps carbon in the ground where we need it in terms of meeting our climate goals. So we joined, there was a massive, again, and kudos to NOFA and kudos to CISA, there was a massive onslaught and a push in the legislature to recognize working land, open land, as part of a climate solution. So the Healthy Soils was really one of the first pieces of legislation that actually incentivizes sequestration. We're now pushing that out. My team and I are actually going to put out a no net loss bill so that we really recognize the role of farmers, the role of landowners, private landowners, the role of state-owned land in meeting our climate goals. And it really started with just recognizing good farming practices and raising them up so that the state can and should invest in them. So now that it's law, we have to get it funded. And that's what we're working on in this bill so that farmers will have grant programs and access to different resources, hopefully access to a capital fund so they can buy new farm equipment to be able to do this really critical climate justice, food security work.
Thank you, Joe. I feel like that is just such a good example of how there's so much work happening all the time, which didn't stop because of this crisis that we've been in. So it's good to be able to take a step back and hear a little bit more about that. So we are just about at the end of our time, but we do have some important business to attend to. So thanks so much to everybody for sticking with us while we do this. And Phil will wrap it up at the very end. But I'd like to introduce Caroline Pam, who wears a lot of hats with Kitchen Garden Farm and Sunderland Farm Collaborative, but today is serving in her CISA board member role, and she is going to walk us through our board election. Caroline?
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. So we have a new slate of board nominees that we are going to vote on today. You'll see the bios of the nominees in the chat. We are going to be voting on new members who will serve a 3-year term, and continuing board members will continue serving their 3-year terms. So you can read about the nominees in the chat, and in a minute we'll have a poll that will begin in the chat, so you'll be able to vote that way. So I guess we're gonna have Jacob do that in the chat, take a look in there. And so we are now going to ask CISA members to vote on the incoming board members. And a member is anyone who believes in CISA's mission and has made a donation to CISA in the past year. So you are being asked to vote in favor of accepting the slate as presented. So you can answer in the chat aye, and if you're opposed, answer nay. So can I ask for somebody to make a motion in the chat? And then a second. All right, I think we are ready to activate the poll. So we'll give 1 minute for everybody to submit their responses. Seems it hasn't yet been a minute, but we have lots of votes coming in. Okay, so I think that we have 100% voting aye. So Claire, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And thanks everybody. Phil is going to just wrap it up for us in the final moments here. Phil.
Thank you. So as we welcome our new board members, we need to say goodbye to the departing members. Insia Mohammed Bergeron served 1 term, and she brought so much to the board. And John Kikowski of Maple Line Farm, who I think might still be with us. He served 2 terms, 6 years, and John brought his experience, his humor, and a lot of chocolate and coffee milk. So I have to say that, right now I'm just feeling so much hope and possibility as we slowly leave the shadows and move into more light. And I encourage everyone just to breathe deep, be grounded, grab some soil, roll up your sleeves, find your local farmer, share the harvest broadly, and make changes happen now. I do hope and pray that I get to see everyone really soon in person this year, and that we all feel really good that we're creating a better world for our children and our children's children. And before I say goodbye, I want everyone to remember the links that we shared, and that a little bit of a preview that CISA's storytelling event, Field Notes, will be available for your viewing pleasure in the late spring. So again, thank you so much for your time, your passion, your creativity, and your support. Stay safe and healthy. Take care.
And thanks to all of our panelists and to Caroline and Al. Thanks for your time and for sharing all of your expertise. So have a good night.